When people have close encounters of the fourth kind, does it open up some kind of pathway for some of the contactees where they have newfound spiritual experiences? Do ETs sometimes leave behind physical traces of their visitations, and what are some of the physical effects that have been documented after these visitations? Do people who have been abducted begin to experience other types of strange paranormal activity down the road? Author, contactee, and former MUFON investigator Debra Jordan Kauble joins me to explore these questions and more on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Okay, so my guest tonight, Debra Jordan Kauble, is the central figure in Bud Hopkins' New York Times best-selling book, Intruders, Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods. Originally published in 1987, then in 1992, she co-authored with her sister Kathy Mitchell, Abducted, the story If the Intruders Continues. Her experiences eventually propelled her into the Mutual UFO Network as a field investigator. In Deborah's new book, Extraordinary Contact, Life Beyond Intruders, she shares her close-up and personal experiences with UFOs, poltergeists, the afterlife, EVPs, synchronicities, and non-human entities. Deborah has appeared on the Discovery Channel's Investigation X, the History Channel's UFO Hunters, Sci-Fi Channel, Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, Oprah Winfrey's AM Chicago, and many other shows as well. She's also been a guest speaker at numerous universities, think tanks, and conferences around the world, as well as guest appearances on numerous radio broadcasts and podcasts. Deborah, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, and I'm quite intrigued by the new book and your story. I know your story goes back to Bud Hopkins and his book Intruders, and what was ultimately made into a show. And it's kind of an interesting history there. But I always kind of like to hear the backstory. So maybe if you could take us back to that kind of pivotal experience you had going back to 1983. And, kind of give us a sense of what happened that night.
Well, I was living with my mom and dad at the time. I was a single mom with two little preschool kids and had moved back home after a divorce. I was about to go cut some patterns out for a seamstress friend of mine who lived in the street behind mom and dad's house. And as I was getting ready to leave and washing up, I noticed a light outside the kitchen window. It was coming out of the pump house of the swimming pool in the backyard. So they had an underground, cement swimming pool, and they had a big pump house next to it. And this light was coming out of the pump house, and I thought, that's weird. So I mentioned it to my mom, and I was just concerned maybe somebody was out there going to steal something, And she didn't seem too worried about it, so I went ahead and left. But I decided to drive along the side driveway back to the turnaround behind the house and then come back through just to double check and make sure that there wasn't somebody out there before I left. And I did, and I didn't see anything except that I noticed that the pedestrian door to the attached garage was now open, and I didn't think it should be open. So instead of stopping, I just went ahead and went on to my friend's house because it only took a couple minutes. And as soon as I got there, I called her and I let her know about the door being open. And again, she didn't seem too concerned about it. My dad was working second shift at Ford at the time, so he wasn't home. But she said, I'll just lock the doors and your dad will be home before long and it'll be all right. I said, okay. So I hung up the phone, and about real quick after I hung it up, the phone rang, and I picked it up and answered it because I was standing right by it. And it was my mother, and she said, I want you to come home right now. And I said, well, why? What's wrong? I got a little disturbed by this because she sounded like she was afraid, and my mom never seemed to get afraid of anything. So something was not right. My friend's husband overheard our phone conversation, and he yelled over my shoulder, tell her to call the police. That's what they get paid for. And she heard him, and she said, no, I don't want anybody here but you. I'm like, okay. So I went home, and I told my friend, I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm just going to go make sure everything's all right. So I went home, pulled up to the side driveway that I had originally gone down when I was looking to see if I could see anybody. And I got out and went into the patio room because the door, it was right next to that side drive. And Mom was in there, and I walked over to the trash compactor and I picked up the shotgun that my dad had kept back there. And my mom says, that's not loaded right, which I knew it wasn't loaded because when we moved in there with the kids, I had asked them to please not leave it loaded. I didn't want a loaded gun sitting around anywhere where my kids could reach it. So I said, yeah, I know it's not loaded, but whoever I smack upside the head with isn't going to know it, and otherwise in my mind, I'm thinking I can get close enough to them with it that they'll think they're going to get shot before I hit them, And like I say, that was out of character for me because at that point in my life, in that age, I was not that brave of a person. I would do that now without even thinking twice about it. It wouldn't bother me at all. There's not much left on this planet I'm scared of anymore. But back then, it was a big deal that I did that. Now, I walked around out in the yard, checked the pump house, went back by the workshop and my dad's ladder truck where I found my dog. She'd been in the garage and she was now under Daddy's ladder truck, but she wouldn't come out. And then I decided to go check the garage. So I went into the garage and flipped on the light, said a few choice words, walking around like Elmer Fudd with my shotgun. There was a couple of mattresses leaned up against the wall, and there was nobody in the garage. So the only place anybody could have been hiding was behind those mattresses. So I creeped up with it, looking behind it. And all of a sudden I felt like my body just felt like it was on fire. I just felt weird, and just like an instant flash came over me, and I thought, oh my God, I have to get out of here right now. And I turned and I ran to the pedestrian door. And when I got to the doorway, something hit me like in the chest area, like right here in the solar plexus area. It was the most white, intense whiteness, light I've ever seen in my life. I know my eyes were closed, but I could still see it. And it was still so bright that it hurt. And I could feel this light spread through my body, down my legs and in my arms and in my head. And it felt like I could feel every individual molecule that made up my body vibrate independently of each other. It just was weird. That's the only way I could think in my head to describe it. And it felt like time stopped. I don't know how long I stood there like that in that bright light. I have no idea. But I know that when the vibration stopped and the brightness let up of the light where I could kind of see a little bit again, I was a little bit farther out the doorway, and somebody was pulling down on my shoulder from behind, and I felt like somebody stuck me in the ear. In my mind, I was imagining a knitting needle that somebody held over a fire till it was hot and then just shoved it in my head. And then I thought, I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't fight. And I heard in my head a voice that said it was unfortunate that I felt pain. And that I noticed a light in front of me, maybe 20 or 25 feet in the yard, about the size of a basketball. It was much softer. Didn't hurt to look at it. And it went down real slow and then came back up to about where I am height-wise. I'm 5'3". And I thought it was looking at me for some reason. I don't know why. And then I noticed movement in the yard. And I thought, I saw kids in my mom's yard. They were coming from different directions in the yard, and they all kind of lined up here to my right and farther away from me. And then they just kind of glided down in front of me. And I thought to myself, what are these kids doing in mom's yard? And then I looked, as I watched them glide in front of me, that's when I saw this thing that like I said, we call a craft because we don't know what else to call it. I don't know what it was. And I don't think that 6 little people or children or whatever could go in this thing and fly any great distance because they would be crowded, and there's no way that was flying anywhere. So I don't know what it was. It wasn't much bigger than the pump house. It was maybe a little smaller than a mini barn or a shed, storage shed, but egg shaped, and smaller at the top, bigger around the middle, and then smaller at the bottom. Had a couple appendages coming off the sides of it, out of this, in the middle of it, down to the ground, but they were real skinny looking. They didn't look sturdy. And I wasn't even sure it was completely on the ground all the time because I thought it was moving a little bit. My vision was horrible because it was like had my picture taken by a bunch of old-fashioned flash cubes and didn't blink fast enough. So I had those like white splotches on my vision. So it was kind of marring my vision a little bit. Couldn't make out a lot of detail, but I could see enough to see there was something out there. And I didn't not want to look at it. I didn't want to look at it because it scared me. It terrified me. As soon as I saw it, I looked away, and then I thought, no, I need to know where it is. So I looked back at it, and then I remember thinking, oh my God, my kids, they're in the house and this weirdness is going on out here. And somebody, again, that same voice said, your children are fine. And then the next thing I remember is heard my name being called.
Now, Debra, if I could ask, did it seem that this was kind of telepathic communication? I think you said voices in your head. So it was as if you were not really hearing it in your ears, but kind of hearing it through your head. Is that a way to describe
it could have been. I did not see anyone. I did not see anyone. So therefore I can't say 100% sure whether it was in my head or they were standing behind me and I just couldn't see them. But I did not see anyone. So I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you said that, but you could see what looked like childlike figures. How many would you say we're talking about?
6.
6. Okay.
Yeah, there was quite a few. And I told Bud, I remember I think I said once that they were kind of bullet shaped. I couldn't make out a lot of detail. And when I meant bullet shaped, I meant like bigger their heads were bigger and then they got narrower and smaller down, because they all seemed to be stiff. And when they glided in front of me like that, they all were like arms down and kind of stiff and like standing at attention or something. But so anyways, I heard my name being called and I didn't know it at the time, but later I found out that was actually my mom. She'd stuck her head out the kitchen door of the upper level of the tri-level, the back porch, called my name. And as soon as I turned around, as soon as I heard my name and I turned, I forgot everything I just told you. That just was wiped from my mind for a few days. I didn't start remembering it till a few days later. I walked up the back patio or the back steps to the kitchen porch, and Mom said, "Is everything all right?" And I said, "Yeah, everything's cool." But at that point, I did not want to cut patterns anymore. I just wanted to swim, not sew. So I went back to my friend's house and I said, "Hey, instead of cutting patterns tonight, you want to go swimming? Because it's a nice and warm evening and the pool's nice." And she's like, "Yeah, we could do that." So she got her daughter, who's like a preteen, early teen, and the 3 of us went back home. They never mentioned, it's weird because her and her husband never mentioned how long I was gone. And when it was brought to their attention, a year or so later, when Bud started the investigation of how long I actually was gone, they helped us figure out the timing. When they realized I'd been gone, about an hour and a half, and it was like they were even, the street behind us, they were even kind of shut off a little bit, they didn't, because she's like, "I would have been worried about you. I knew you were going back there, because something might be weird. And I would have called. I can't believe I didn't call." It kind of bothered her but that's the way these things happen, I guess. But anyway, we came back and we walked across the backyard to go get in the pool. and her daughter stepped on something in the yard as we were walking across the backyard to the pool. We thought maybe she stepped on a bee or something, but we didn't see anything. So we got in the swimming pool, and we were probably in there maybe 15 minutes or something. I can't even remember. It's been a while. It's been 38 years, as a matter of fact. But we were in the pool. My eyes started feeling really weird, and I started getting a headache, and my vision started getting weird. Like I was seeing halos around all the lights, and kind of like when you open my eyes, felt like I'd opened my eyes in chlorine water a whole bunch. You ever done that when you're a kid? And your eyes
Sure.
feel dry and stingy, and everything has a halo around it. That's exactly what my eyes were doing. But I hadn't got my head in the water. And all three of us were kind of nauseated. And so my friend Deanna, she's like, "Hey, let's go to White Castle. Maybe we'll feel better if we eat something." And I'm like, "Okay," it sounded like a good idea at the time, but we actually did not end up going. But we were going to go to White Castle, and that's like a 24-hour hamburger joint with these little square hamburgers that have onions in them, and we called them gut bombers. So really not a place you want to go if you're nauseated. So I don't know what we were thinking, but we did it. Well, we were going to, but we aborted that and ended up we all just felt so crappy that they just went home, and I went home. And that was the end of the night. And the next morning when I woke up, my eyes were swollen and they hurt really bad, and they had junk coming out of them, and I couldn't see because they were so swollen. So my mother took me to the emergency room, and from the emergency room, I was taken to the doctor across the street, who was an eye doctor. He wanted me to go to his office. He wanted Mom to take me over there because he had the equipment to examine me better. So she did. And he asked me if I had looked into the arc of a welder's torch, which I said, no. And I did not tell him about the bright light because at that point, I still didn't remember it. That weekend, all the family came over because it was 4th of July weekend to shoot off fireworks, have a swimming party, and cook out, which we did every year. And all the kids went running out the back door to the swimming pool. And my oldest nephew, came running back in and said, "Grandma, what's wrong with your backyard?" And so all of us adults went out there to check it out because we hadn't even, I don't know why nobody, me, Mom, or Dad, had none noticed this thing. We got out to the backyard, and there was a mark in the yard. It was an 8-foot diameter circle, and it had a 49-foot streak going off the one edge of it up to the driveway, and it was about 2 feet wide and ended in a perfect round arc, and like a half circle. And the grass in it was all beigeish gray and just laid over, and the dirt under it was kind of gray and really hard, and it smelled weird. And my mother looks at it. We're all just kind of standing around it, looking at it, going, "What the hell is that? And when did that show up here? Like, why didn't we just notice this until just now?" And Mom says, "Well, that's where our UFO landed the other night." And I'm like, "What? Why'd you say?" I'm like looking at her, and I'm thinking, "Why did you say that? Where did that come from?" And then I looked at Mark again, and it was like, bam. I started remembering. First thing I saw was 2 big black eyes in my face, like right up between me and the mark. And I'm like, "Oh my God." And then it was just like somebody pulled a finger out of the dam. All the memories from that point on for days and weeks started coming back. And I remembered that much. And I had picked up the book Missing Time several months before this happened. I picked it up with a lot of other books. I didn't completely understand what it was about until I got to reading in it, and that was fine because my family, we grew up very open-minded, and we always had a lot of paranormal stuff happen in our family that I thought everybody did. When I was a kid, I just assumed that's how everybody was. And in 1965, my sister had a UFO encounter in the back parking lot of the Holy Spirit Catholic Church that she claimed lifted her whole car up into it with her in it. And that was in 65. And she told the story, to family members, and us little kids, we just had no, I mean, we just took it for granted that it was the truth because she had no reason to lie about it. You know what I mean? So when I realized what the book was, I was still reading it, trying to read it, but I was having panic attacks every time I tried to read it. So I never really finished it. I have it sitting on my bookshelf right over here. And to this day, I've never read the whole thing. But
Wow.
in the back of the book, there's an address where you could write the guy who wrote the book if you thought you'd had that kind of experience. And based on what I was beginning to remember, kind of thought maybe I just had. And I was sure my sister had in 65. So I wrote to him and I first told him about her story, and I didn't get her permission. So she was not really happy with me at first. I kind of threw her under the bus because I 14-page letter and, half a dozen Polaroids fall out of this envelope that he opens up. And the first part of it's all about Kathy and her experience, my older sister. And then I get, about 8 pages in, and I'm like, oh, by the way, this happened on June 30th. So, and so that's how my mom mailed the letter eventually, and then he called, and that's how, Bud and I connected. And at that point, it started a like 3-year investigation. I went to New York couple of times. I didn't have a lot of money. I sold my washer and dryer that I had in storage to get the bus ticket to go the first time. And I always tell everybody I had a panic attack on the bus and thought, what are you doing? You're going to see some stranger you don't know in New York City. He could be an axe murderer. He wrote a book about alien abduction, for Christ's sake. He could be insane. You could be insane. Your mother, what is wrong? I mean, all this stuff was going through my head, and I almost jumped off the bus and, halfway there, but I didn't. And then he came out a few times, and there were phone calls, although this was before cell phones, so those long distance calls were expensive. So there was a lot of writing. I mean, I would write him probably every week. And he hooked me up with a buddy, like in the buddy system, somebody that was farther in their journey and to help, that somebody I could talk to when I needed someone to talk to, and I managed to get some samples of the stuff in the yard and sent them to him. And I still have some here of my own that I've kept these years. And so he had tests run on soil. He had me see a psychiatrist when I got to New York. And then he had me, I had 6 hours of verbal and written psychological testing at the Columbia Hospital. I had an EEG and a CAT scan of my brain to rule out seizures or any brain anomalies or anything like that. So, I mean, he was very thorough. I guess he had donations that pay for these tests because I didn't have the money, and I don't think he did either. I'm not sure. But I agreed to it. It was done in a hospital. I'd sign a waiver, but I was just desperate for help. I didn't, when he finally approached us all about a book that, after a couple of years, and this was getting deep, and spreading out amongst people in the family and neighbors and friends and everything, he's like, I think I really need to write a book about this. And we're like, no, that's all right. You don't need, we don't want you to write a book. That was not our agenda. That was certainly not my agenda when I reached out to him. I was just trying to get help. That's how desperate I was. But eventually he convinced us that, it would help a lot of people. And so we agreed to it. And I just wanted to mention, my eyes were so damaged. I believe, I can't prove this. I'm never going to be able to prove it, but my belief is that my eyes were damaged that night because I was diagnosed with cataracts and macular degeneration in my 30s. And by the time I hit 50, I had to have my lenses completely removed and replaced. And now my macular degeneration is stable and it's dry. And so my vision is holding steady and it's doing pretty good. It hasn't progressed because they got on it so early. But my eyes have never been right since that night. Never. And I will always blame that on my eyes. I can't, like I said, I can't prove it, but it's just as a side note, you know. So
Yeah, Deborah, I wanted to ask, because I think I heard you say this in another discussion, another interview. There were other neighbors that heard or saw things during this event. Is that correct?
that's correct. The lady that lived to the left of us, there's like a small scrub of trees and stuff and a little wooded area between our houses. The houses were large and farther apart than the typical neighborhood. And there was little scrubs of trees between hers and ours. And Bud, we didn't know it until Bud came and started knocking on doors. Because he literally did the footwork. He was out knocking on doors, interviewing neighbors and stuff. And but come to find out that she was home, I think home alone that night, and saw a bright flash from the area of mom and dad's backyard, and something I think shook the house and the windows, and her television screen turned red. And I don't know why, but when her husband told Bud that when he came home, she was like cowering behind a couch or something, and she was petrified and was mumbling something about somebody coming to get her. Yeah, this is a lady next door. Then a lady directly across the street, also a wooded area between her house and ours as well. And she was across the road. She was a shift nurse, night shift nurse at the hospital I was born at, actually. And she told Bud that she was awakened prior to she was in bed because she was gonna, get up shortly and start getting ready for work. But she was awakened before her alarm went off by what she thought was she said it sounded like a jet was about to crash into her house. It was so loud, the roaring sound, and her house shook. And an odd thing she noticed was that all the clocks at the front of her house had stopped. All the clocks in the front part of her house had stopped, but the ones in the back hadn't. And it's funny because the front part of her house is the closest to our house. And yeah, I mean, we didn't even know about them having, seen or had something happen until he came and started knocking on doors. Because I mean, we didn't talk to our neighbors that much, I mean, we talked to one set of neighbors on one side of us, and they were older. They didn't report anything, but the one on the other side did. So, and it's interesting because the one on the other side her side was the side of the house where this thing was. So the other neighbor wouldn't have been able to seen it because our house would have been in the way the houses were set on the property. So that was interesting.
Just a little bit about what your mom had experienced as well, what she had reported seeing.
Yeah, well, she at first she didn't tell me what triggered her to have me come home. And it was like a week later, she goes, I just remember why I called you to come back home that night. And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, I was standing at the kitchen sink looking out the window, and I saw a light around the bird feeder. And she said, I thought it was like a flashlight, beam, a light, somebody shining a flashlight on it. So she said, I was trying to look and see if somebody was like behind the patio room shining the flashlight on it, or maybe somebody pulled up in the driveway and it was headlights. She goes, but I didn't see anybody. I kept looking at this ball of light. She said it was about the size of a basketball, which is exactly like the light I remember seeing looking at me. And she said it was real soft light, but it got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then when it disappeared, she said, that's when I thought, ooh, I need to call Debbie.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's Debbie, what I said.
As these memories kind of start to come back, which seems to be kind of common of abduction accounts, where people kind of recall more and more details, either through regression or down the road. Did you ever get the sense that you were kind of transported from the yard somewhere else? Anything like that?
Well, my conscious memories pretty much stop where, my story with me telling you that's what I remember consciously. I did have a regression later with regards to that night where I might have been somewhere else for a while with the Greys, and but that was something that's not what I remember. I didn't remember it consciously. That was something that I remembered after hypnosis, and I still don't remember most of it. I don't remember whether under regression or spontaneously. I don't remember, the entire hour and 15 minutes by any means. So, but you know what? I've come to realize after all these years, and then being an investigator myself and hearing so many cases here in Indiana for 10 years, that time really doesn't, our time, I think, doesn't match up with their time. So what we think is an hour and a half could be 2 days for them, or 2 minutes.
Interesting. But I think he talks about in his book how a lot of these experiencers they tend to be multi-generational.
Mm-hmm.
Is that been the case for you? Have you traced back? I know you said your sister had experiences. She had co-authored the book with you. Anybody else in the family who had experiences?
Well, when Bud came to investigate, and of course he interviewed everybody individually and group, we'd sit down as a group and talk too. But when he interviewed my mom, I learned something about her that I had never known before. Well, I knew she was adopted. She was adopted at 2. She was adopted by a master sergeant in the United States Army, and he took her to China. And she lived in China for a couple of years, and then she lived in Rhode Island, and they finally settled in Louisville. But when she was little, she had a memory of being chased through the woods by a little blonde-headed boy with brown eyes. And I think that's all I remember hearing her saying, that she had this vague memory of being chased by this little boy. And that's interesting because when I was 5, I had also a memory of an encounter with a little blonde-haired, brown-eyed boy, so that was kind of similar in a weird little way. And then, of course, my youngest son had all the nosebleeds and problems. The oldest son didn't seem like he was being affected, but the youngest son did. My oldest son would wake up paralyzed and screaming that the little man with the big head was coming out of the closet to get his little brother. So, I mean, there was that, in which I got very mama bear and protective. And then I have a granddaughter who's now 14, and when she was about 5, she had night terrors for several months. And she told her dad that the little man with the big head was going to come through the window and take her. And he got furious with me because he thought that I had somehow exposed her to this, because we had a rule at Mom and Dad's when the boys were little. We did not talk about, other than if they wanted to tell us something that they'd seen, we did not talk about this when the boys were in earshot or around. We did not discuss it because we didn't want to scare them, and we didn't want to contaminate their subconscious later on down the road if they had memories of their own they wanted to explore. You know what I mean? I didn't want my kids to be scared any more than they'd already been. So that was our rule. And Robbie had a rule with his daughter. We weren't talking about this around her or in front of her. Very strict. If something came on TV, or we were just flipping through the channels and there happened to be something on there, which, later on, that didn't used to happen back 38 years ago, but now it does. We'd flip by real quick and ignore it. And so I swore to him, none of us had said anything around her or anything to her about any of this. And I was upset and I was crying. And he was so mad at me that he didn't let her come stay with me for like 3 months. And I talked to her and stuff, but she wasn't allowed to spend the night with me until they could get this under control, you know. And he uh, put closed things on her bedroom window. He got a radio and a nightlight, and he took a Glade air freshener can, made a new label with it that said "No aliens," anti-alien spray or whatever. So every night they had this ritual where they spray it around her room and stuff. And eventually, you know, after about 3 months, she stopped and never had it again. And everything went back to normal. And she started coming and hanging out with me again, Nene, and all that. But then, I guess it was right before lockdown, like early, like March or of 2020, or, you know what I mean, right before everything started locking down from COVID, she had come up to spend a few days with us because, and so she was like 13 or something like that, 12 or 13. She looks at me and she says, "Hey, Nene." Oh, we were watching TV and a commercial for Ancient Aliens came on. And I started to pick the remote up and I'm like, oh my God, this kid is, you know, I'm not, it's all over. I can't change it. So we weren't even watching it. It was just a commercial. And her and I were talking and she looked over at me and she goes, "Hey, Nene, do you believe in aliens?" And I looked at her and said, "Yeah." That's all I said. I didn't elaborate. I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Cool. So do I." And I said, "Cool." And that's all I said. And I thought in my mind, I was kind of freaking out because I went back to when she was a little kid again. And I thought there was something to that. But I felt kind of good because now she knew that, because I'm sure she knows she couldn't talk to her mom or dad about this, but now she knows she can talk to me about it. And now she knows she has somewhere, you know. So I was happy about that, but not happy about the rest of it. But I mean, I can't stop it. So I mean, I got to figure out a way to live with it. But
Sure. I want to talk. I think you talked a little bit in another interview about an experience, I want to say late 70 time frame that you had. I don't remember if this was something you recalled later in life, brought back. I believe it was something that happened in the bedroom. Can you recount that
sure.
story?
I was a newly married. And this was not a dream, damn it. And that's why I kept telling my husband at the time, this is not a dream. I remember waking up and sitting up in my bed, and those two grays, I just called them little guys with the big heads and the big eyes, they were in my room. And when I saw them, I freaked out and I got panicky. And I thought, don't kill me, please. Just don't come near me. Don't touch me. And then I calmed down immediately. So I don't know if they did something to me, but I stopped panicking. I calmed down and I could actually have a conversation sort of with them. They had a black box in their hand. It was about the size of a shoebox and it had a little red light, like either in it or flat on top of it or something. It was kind of a glowy red small thing. And it kind of floated over to my lap and I said, "What is this? Can I have it?" And they said, "No, you can't have it. But when you see it again, you'll know what it is and you'll know what to do with it." I'm like, "Okay." And then they took the box back and they left. They just kind of backed up and fizzled away. And I tried to wake my husband up. He was laying right next to me and he wouldn't wake up. And so I just slid back down in the bed and I fell asleep, which I know that sounds weird, but that's what I did. And then the next morning I woke up and I'm like, "Charlie, you're not going to believe what happened last night." And I couldn't wake you up. And I told him, and he looked at me like, "Oh, okay." And he said, he made some smart crack about what I had had for supper. Like I'd ate something that gave me nightmares, you know? And I'm like, I said, "It wasn't a nightmare." And I called my mother and I told my mother about it. And so she remembered. She told Bud. She remembered when I called her. And I told her this whole thing. And she thought, and Bud, I think he asked her what she thought about it. She's like, "Oh, no." But the funny thing was, okay, and that was, let's see, that was in 78, I believe. And wasn't too long after that, I got pregnant with my son. And then in July of 79, I had to have an emergency C-section because I developed eclampsia and my organs were failing, and I was like semi-comatose, and they had to take him about 6.5 weeks to 7 weeks early because I was dying. And the only cure was to end the pregnancy. So, I mean, the baby had a higher chance of living than I did. And this was 42 years ago. So, this was 40 some years ago. So they did an emergency C-section. And that's when I had my near-death experience. And in that near-death experience, they gave me the medication to paralyze me. And then they gave me the medication to knock me out. But whatever they gave me to knock me out did not work because I could feel every cut, every pinch and pull as they opened me up to take my baby. And I couldn't move or let anybody know that I could feel anything because I was paralyzed totally. I was trying to shake my legs and everything to try, but I couldn't do, nothing was working. And I could hear them talking, and I told my doctor later, I heard you talking about boats at Geist Reservoir. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and I'm like, you did. He never confirmed or denied it, but he looked at me kind of weird. And I said, the voices started to get farther and farther away, and then started feeling like it sounded like they were in a whole different room from me. And at some point, I disconnected from my body. And I could almost feel it was like a unplugging, like a boom, and I was in this little black box. I was in this box. I could feel it all around me with my hands, but I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even see my hands, but I could feel this box, and I started pounding on it with my fists. And I was screaming at the top of my lungs, "Let me out. I'm not dead. Let me out." And then I hear a voice, which I don't think it was an angel or anything like that. I think it was a nurse in that operating room whisper in my ear, "Your baby just got born. You can't leave yet. He needs his mother." And, while I was pounding on the walls of that black box, screaming to let me out, I completely forgot about my entire life or the fact that I just had a baby. None of that. I forgot all of that, But when she said that, I'm like, "Oh, my baby." And I remembered it, and I locked right back in. And the voices got louder and louder and louder. And then there was a lot of screaming and banging around. I felt my body being lifted up and dropped twice. I felt some straps going around my legs. And then I felt air go into me like water. And it felt so good. And I was like, and I was like gulping this air in. And it just felt so good to gulp this air in. And my heart had stopped, and I'd been resuscitated twice. I didn't know it until I got the bill later. They didn't even tell me. They may have told my husband, but he didn't tell me. But I mean, I was 19. But
Oh,
that near-death experience always made me go back to think about, you know, I'll tell you what, Whitley Strieber. I was talking with him about it not too long ago, and he made a good point that maybe that black box they showed me was the black box that I was in
yes.
when I was going to die, but I couldn't leave yet because I still had too much stuff to do, and I had a baby that needed me, And I'm like, that makes sense to me, but who knows?
Yeah, as soon as you started mentioning the black box and the near-death experience, I thought back to the story you had just mentioned before, in the bedroom where the sound like gray alien
Yeah.
is holding the black box. So yeah, that's the first thing I thought of when you actually told that story too. That's quite interesting. How about following after the 83 experience? Were there a lot more subsequent experiences? Were they just a few?
Well, I had another pretty spectacular one with my mom in April of '84, and it was a big boomerang shaped craft floated right over the house, and it was humongous. And it was all black until it got right over the house, and then it lit up like a Christmas tree underneath, except it was all white. Lots of dots of lights and bars of light, and this ring of light where the two wings met with a little red dot in the middle. And then it glided over the house. It was pretty silent, except for like a low pitched hum that you almost more felt and heard, and it went back behind the house. Mom was standing out in front of it on the porch going, "Oh my God, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And I'm like, "Oh, hell no, not again." So I left her on the porch and I ran through the house as it glided over the house. And I ran out the back kitchen door as it was coming over the backyard. And I saw it get over by Shadeland and 465, and it flipped, like just turned right on its axis and started going back west, only a little bit north of me. And I'm thinking, holy cow, this thing is huge. I live in a big city. Indianapolis was not a small city. And we were only 15 minutes from downtown. So it would stand to reason that thousands and thousands of people would see this and report it, which we assumed. So we got the TV on, we got the radio on, nothing. But Bud had given me the phone number to CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, and MUFON. Well, CUFOS had a 24-hour hotline. So I called it, and J. Allen Hynek answered the phone. So we talked to him. He had Mom and me draw a picture independently of what we'd seen for him, and had interviewed us on the phone, each of us individually. And then it's at some point, I don't know if it was at that conversation or if Mom talked to him again, like the day or so after, because we were so sure that there would be this all over the news and not one single report of anything. And my mom made a comment to him about it, and he told my mom he was beginning to think that maybe not everyone could see these things. And that would make sense, because there's no way on the planet that tens of thousands of people didn't see this unless they couldn't, because it was just that massive and that low. It was just above the treetops in a city with millions of people. Okay. Now, I bet you there were people that did see it, but they wasn't telling anybody. This was 38 years ago. The attitude was a lot different than it is now. So that happened. And then we had a lot of paranormal activity kind of ramped up, things that people would consider poltergeist activity. And that followed me when I moved. And I started having more lucid dreams. And then my encounters started becoming less physical and more metaphysical in nature. I also got involved with paranormal research at some point and kind of merged the two, UFO and paranormal, for me, So it's been an interesting ride.
Sure. Talk about, you've talked a little bit before, maybe in the book, you've covered it too, about some of the poltergeist experiences that followed after that 83 experience.
Well, when Mom was down in the basement once doing laundry, there was a copper pipe that was really not attached to anything, that was just kind of laying up on other ductwork and stuff up in there. And one day when she went down to do the laundry, she noticed that copper pipe was pretty much like tied into a pretzel knot. And there's just really no way that could happen. I don't think anybody took a picture of it. I don't think anybody had the presence of mind to take a picture of it. I wish they had, but I don't think there's one in existence. I know my little sister and her boyfriend were down in the basement making out one time. There was a pool table down there, and my bedroom was down there at one time when I was a teenage hippie, with the black walls and black lights with, poster paint walls and stuff. But yeah, it was pretty wild. It was like a party down there. And so my little sister and one of her boyfriends were down there making out on the pool table. And there was this, because there was no closet down there, I had like a metal wardrobe, double door wardrobe, and the magnets didn't stick right. So I'd like wrapped a coat hanger around it to make the doorknobs to make it stay closed. And while they were sitting down there making out, the doorknob, the coat hanger unwrapped itself, and Sherry said it was like somebody was inside of there and kicked it open from the inside. and there wasn't anybody in there, and it scared the living hell out of them, and they came flying upstairs, and I don't think that boy ever came back. And then one time, Mom, Kathy, and I were sitting at the kitchen table having a cigarette and a cup of coffee and just talking. Mom had a big amber glass ashtray, one of those giant heavy ones that you'd see, back in the day. And I remember reaching over and flipped my cigarette in the ashtray. And just as at the exact same moment I flipped my cigarette in the ashtray, that ashtray split in half with a loud crack, like a thump. And it was a perfect split right down the middle. And the one side of it slid to one end of the table by my sister. The other side of it slid to the other side of it was just a little round table. And there was 3 chairs. The rest of it was pushed up against the wall and slid to the edge of the other side of the table, right to the edge, didn't go off. And all the butts that were in there were just sitting in the middle. And my mom, first thing, she's like, well, damn, that was expensive. That she was mad about the ashtray breaking. My sister was like, I'm out of here. See ya. And she got up and she'd said she thought she heard the Indian corn rattle on the front door. We had Indian corn hanging on the front door, and she thought somebody was scraping it back and forth before, but she didn't say anything until after that ashtray split. And she left because it freaked her out. And I was like, damn, that's cool. Did I do that? Because it was exactly at the same moment that I flipped my cigarette. So I went boop, and it just went.
Wow.
So, I mean, stuff like that happened all the time. It didn't scare me or bother me. It didn't scare my mom or bother her. It did bother my sister, but she didn't live in that house. So, she could leave.
These kind of experiences, did you have paranormal experiences younger before these, the 83 experience? Anything that were that significant? Or
I don't
did these
recall. Yeah, I don't recall anything that significant, but I just recall like little things that would happen when I was a kid. Things would become missing and then show up in weird places. That lights would turn on and off, TVs would turn on and off. Just typical, I guess you'd call poltergeist activity stuff. But I mean, I thought that was just normal, and we never thought anything of it, really. We grew up with it, and my parents didn't make a big deal out of it, so we didn't know to be, scared of it.
But the activity kind of picked up or ramped up after you had your experience. Is that correct?
Yes, it seemed like it did. Now I do remember. I can't remember whether the ice storm was before or after 83. But I remember when we had a big ice storm and everybody's power was out for days, and my sister and her husband and her kids came over to Mom's and stayed because they didn't have no heat and we had a fireplace. And my brother-in-law swore up and down, he kept seeing a little kid running around, like a little shadow kid running around in the house. And it scared the hell out of him because he was sleeping in the living room on the floor. But we didn't care. Hell, it was just another kid in the family as far as we were concerned. And apparently it was interested in him because it kept trying to peek at him and look at him. So it had already seen us and didn't need to look at us, I guess. I don't know.
Wow. And so you got into paranormal pursuits, working with paranormal groups.
Mm-hmm.
Was that as a result of that experience and kind of subsequent experiences you'd had?
Yeah, I think it always attracted me to it. I was mostly attracted to the EVPs. I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. So I actually, about 25 years ago, when I first started trying to record EVPs, and I actually captured a really good one right off the bat. It was the voice of an old man that said, "Are the spirits listening?" And then another voice right behind it that said, "Can I listen too?" And I was at that point, I had an epiphany where I realized that, we're the spirits somewhere else. And then I started remembering more things about somewhere I'd been at some point in my life or before or whatever, sometime where I was told, that universes were like bubbles and clusters, and, there were other entities living in other clusters. They're like right here in this room with me. they were separated by the thin film of a soap bubble. So, and I wanted to record it. I feel like some of the EVPs and recordings I had captured over the years are not necessarily spirits or anybody that's ever lived here, and aren't necessarily dead, so to speak. You know, they're just somewhere else.
Is that kind of due to the random nature of what you capture, or what has kind of led you down that?
Well, there's been a few things that I've captured that were the voices were ID'd by family members. They recognized the voice. And you got to think, well, spirits don't have bodies, so how can they have a voice? But maybe they, manipulate things so that the people who are listening to it can recognize it, the energy, in some way. I don't know. But for instance, that when I heard the voice of the man say, "Are the spirits listening?" I felt like that man wasn't dead. That man was sitting at a kitchen table like me with an audio recorder, and he was trying to capture an EVP somewhere else. And I just happened to capture him asking the question. You know what I mean? That's the main thing that made me suddenly, it was like I had this epiphany, this light bulb went off in my head, like, I'm the spirit somewhere and somebody's trying to listen to me.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then my head went,
yeah, that's kind of a, blow your mind kind of experience. I'm also a paranormal investigator. I've captured a lot of EVPs as well, and they certainly do make you scratch your head. And one of the things you just touched on was, if it is a disincarnate spirit, what some would call a ghost, if they don't have vocal cords, how are they creating pressure waves? Because that's what sound is a pressure wave, and how are you hearing it? These kinds of things kind of baffle your mind, because you think, is it something going directly to the brain? How are you capturing these things? And that's kind of one of the things that's always puzzled me as well about EVPs.
I think that's why we can't hear them with our ears, but our electronic stuff can pick them up, because it's electronic data being placed on a piece of tape or recording equipment. It's not airwave pressure that our ears can hear, and that's why we're not hearing it. Now, I've been in a couple of investigations where we actually heard disembodied voices, and I don't know how that works. I can kind of use a little science to explain some of the stuff that shows up in the digital recording equipment, but that I've heard disembodied voices that were insane. And not alone, other people have.
Yeah, and I have as well, and those kind of baffle you as well. I'm kind of curious, going back to the near-death experience and then the 83 experience and any subsequent experiences. Do you feel like something was turned on that opened you up more to these experiences? What's kind of your sense of that?
Well, you know what? That's a question I've been asking for a long time, and a lot of people have asked me. Was I born this way? Was it something it changed in my DNA when I was born, before I was born, or did initial contact with me, some change, some physiological change due to the physical contact when I was young that, flipped a switch and made me receptive? I don't know. I don't, that's the $64,000 question for me. I don't know. But something is definitely different. Something, something, I am more receptive and sensitive to a lot of things, and it appears that I seem to attract a lot of things. My paranormal groups used to call me the antenna, because it seemed like my recorder was the one that got all the EVPs. We'd have 3 recorders laying down there, and mine would be the only one that would pick one up. So they called me the antenna. One of my buddies said I was like a bug zapper in the dark, that everything out there saw me because I was so bright, and they attracted them. And I'm like, well, that might not be a good thing. But
Yeah, there was a statement. I think it was maybe in the foreword of your book. The statement that my mind and soul have grown, and as a result of your experience. So, I mean, what's the ultimate takeaway? Is it? I mean, from that statement, is it positive in the bigger picture? Uh,
I
what's
feel
kind of?
so. I feel like it is, and I feel like this disclosure that's slowly trickling out now, while people are disappointed in that little 9-page report because there's nothing in it basically, but I'm more excited about what's not in it. They don't say it's not, and I really feel that more and more is going to come out, and I really want to see the stigma that surrounds witness reporting of these phenomenon to go away so that people are comfortable talking about it and comfortable reporting it. 38 years ago when that happened to me, people didn't talk about this. And
Sure.
pilots and military people and police officers and they all were threatened with their jobs, their pensions, you'll never fly again if you report this UFO, all this stuff. That all has to stop because these guys are seeing stuff every day. And people like me have a right to know what the government might know that they're trying to hide because this isn't a political thing. This is a human thing. This is the world. And I really feel like what is going to come out eventually and maybe sooner rather than later is going to blow people's mind. And I don't think it's anything like they think it is. And I think that some of this contact that we're having is with something that we are not going to expect them to tell us. I really do. And I'm excited about it. And I want people, that's why I wrote the book. I want people like me to be comfortable talking about their experiences, no matter how weird they are, because I guarantee you that 99% of the people on this planet have their own weird experiences and they're just too afraid to tell anybody. And if we all start owning it, we all start talking about it, we all start feeling comfortable with it, there's strength in numbers. There's knowledge is power, and we can force the hand and make it happen. We can be the disclosure we've been waiting for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you said that because a lot of people are waiting for the government to come out and disclose. And the more pressure from the public, all of us, and the collective of all of us, telling others what we see, reporting it. The more we share this, and the more we open up to it, the more likely it seems that's going to happen.
Right.
Deborah, you had a chapter in the book, and again, I didn't get a chance to read the book, but it's entitled "Government Involved." Now, was that related to the 1983 experience, or what was that chapter related to?
Now, I don't know what that was. I don't think it was related to that. I don't know. It's just that I had an encounter once with some human people that seemed like they were trying to help me and they were going to take a bug out of my ear. This is what this doctor said to me. He said, "Oh, you got a bug in your ear. I'm going to take it out and you'll feel a lot better." And he kind of laughed at me and I said, or he showed it to me. And then he said, "I don't know why I'm even showing you this because you're not going to remember it." And I said, "Oh, I'm not ever going to forget you." And I remembered him. He was an older man with white hair and reddish, ruddy face with like a bulbous nose, had a really deep voice and a real thick Southern drawl. I will never forget that. Uh, and he was human. And the people that escorted me down the hallway of that hospital, they were all human. They were all wearing orange jumpsuits, like you see prisoners wear now, and hats, ball caps. But and they were human. I don't know who they were or what they were doing or what they wanted, but I had them. Yeah, some strange stuff. And then the black helicopters, they flew around my whole family, all of our houses, and followed my sister around for a couple of years. And obviously that wasn't some kind of covert spying on us because there wasn't anything covert about whatever they did. One time they flew around my house for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and my neighbors actually called me because they thought it was a police helicopter and wanted to make sure I was all right.
Now, Deborah, was this subsequent to your big encounter in '83?
Yes, it was after that.
Interesting.
Hmm.
How many times did this happen? This was just on one occasion?
But the helicopters, oh,
Yes.
multiple times over a period of a couple years.
Wow.
I did have some pictures, and I also I called Indianapolis International Airport at the time. I called Fort Harrison, Fort Benjamin Harrison, the military installation on the northeast side of Indy, and I'm like, what is this, and why are they doing it? And they said, well, uh, I said, these are black helicopters and they have no markings. And she said, well, there's no such thing. And I go, well, yeah, there is, because I have pictures of them. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting stuff. Deborah, hey, it's been great talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and the book. The other thing I wanted to ask is, where can people find your book and more about your work? I know you have a website. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I have a website. It's www.debshome.com, DEBSHOME. We update it daily. And my book, Extraordinary Contact, Life Beyond Intruders, is available on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Nobles, Kindle, any of your online booksellers, you can find it there at any of those. And I believe there's also links to buy it on Amazon on my website. And, hopefully I'll I'll be out there, trying to help people come out and talk about it. You can email me through my website as well if you like to share your story with me. Feel free to email me.
All right. And can you share that email?
DEBKAUBLE@gmail.com. But there's a link. There's an email link in my um, there's an email link at my website, so you can email me through that.
Okay, great. Well, once again, Deborah, thank you so much for joining me and sharing the story with me tonight. Really appreciate it. And
thanks for letting me have the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And have a great, I think you're East Coast time, so it's pretty late, but have a great what's left of the rest of your night.
I will. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.